Hello, this is Anna Pacheco with SantaFe101.com. My guest this afternoon is Alexandra Ladd, and she is the Director of Affordable Housing for the City of Santa Fe. Alexandra, do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Excellent. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. I've always been really curious as to what your department works on, and basically, you can, I've had many realtors talk about real estate in Santa Fe and Santa Fe County, but I'd love to hear what the city of Santa Fe is doing or has done in the past for affordable housing in Santa Fe.
The city has done a lot. The city
Okay.
has approached the affordable housing. I mean, it's really been a crisis in Santa Fe, not just for the last few years, and certainly nothing compared to what's going on now with the pandemic. I think the market is changing in a way we don't even really truly understand. But literally for centuries, I think people have been getting displaced out of this town because they didn't have control over the resources, or they couldn't afford to live here. So with that said, the city approaches affordable housing in three ways. We have a very strong regulation. We require all new development to include a percentage of affordably priced housing. This is for rental or homeownership housing. This is a program called inclusionary zoning, which means to include affordable housing. We also have several policy documents. We work with our nonprofit community. We've got some amazing nonprofit housing services and nonprofit developers here in Santa Fe. We also have some great for-profit developers. We work with everybody. But we develop a lot of programming. We try to respond to what new and emerging needs in the community by these partnerships with our nonprofits. And then finally, we fund programs. So Santa Fe is an entitlement city from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This means we get a community development block grant every year, a CDBG grant. And we use that to support predominantly housing activities. But we also have a local affordable housing trust fund. And if you have looked at the newspapers lately, there's been a lot of talk about how to fund that trust fund more sustainably. Right now, most of the revenue comes from development activity. We have a lot going on right now, a lot of units going up, particularly rental units, and those developers have paid a fee in lieu of providing affordable units on site. So the good news is that revenue is put to good use. We use it for rental assistance. We use it to actually provide subsidy for the construction of new units, new affordable units. We also use it for home repair, down payment assistance, lots of other things. But of course, the part that the community doesn't like is when developers pay fee in lieu of. They're not providing the units on site, and what I like to respond with is that market rate developer is not in a good position to provide affordable housing units because they don't know how to do income certifications. They don't know how to lease them up to the renters who need them. They don't know how to provide support services. You know, it's kind of like if you need a root canal, you wouldn't go to your orthopedic surgeon, you'd go to your dentist. So what we try to do is really focus all of our support on affordable housing that is operated by the affordable housing providers, because it's just results in better outcomes for everybody. I think I just talked way too much. Sorry.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because I had heard that developers, not just in New Mexico, but this loophole that you can pay a fee rather than have some of your units be affordable housing. So I mean, that was one of my questions. So you basically answered that. But then when you said that we're in a crisis, what do you mean by crisis right now? What does that mean?
Well, we know just looking at data that is not current, because high level data like census data, of course, is trended out and based on estimates and stuff. Anyway, but we know that over half of our renter households are paying more than 30% of their incomes for their housing costs. So this means they're cost burdened. And some of them are paying even more than 50% of their incomes for housing costs. That's extremely cost burdened. So that's before the pandemic. That's before people lost jobs or lost hours or shifts at their jobs. So what happens is, you know, and for a long time, I think that the tendency and people for understandable reasons, sort of think of, oh, affordable housing is when you make it possible for the firefighter and the teacher and the nurse and those sort of core community members to be able to afford a house in the community they live in, which is really important, but afford to buy one. And I think what we've realized over the last few years is, yes, and that's important, and we support that actively. But if those people don't have affordable rental situations to live in, they get in debt, their credit score gets affected if once they're in debt, and they start to live in this very precarious financial situation where they're never going to be able to save up for a down payment. You know, they're never going to get stable. So kind of this idea that it's all that the housing market is actually an ecosystem. There's a spectrum of housing needs, and you have to take care of the needs all along the way. Right now, we're also very aggressively dealing with the folks who are homeless, because when the pandemic started, we didn't want, because it's the humane right thing to do, but also from a public health perspective, people living on the streets, they can't observe social distancing. They can't even wash their hands when they need to. So the city dedicated some dormitories at the vacant, used to be College of Santa Fe University of Art and Design campus, to house people who were on the streets, who were otherwise living on the streets. And so the good news is that we have realized we can do that, and it improves everybody's outcomes. It stabilizes folks. They are willing to accept services. They really start to get their lives back on track. And so we are actively pursuing that as another part of the very important housing needs spectrum.
And, you know, I have noticed maybe in the last 2 years, and this is before COVID started, there seemed to be a heck of a lot more homeless people, or a lot more. I mean, literally about 2 years ago, suddenly there was a panhandler on every street corner. And somebody told me that the Albuquerque Police Department was putting their homeless people on the train up to Santa Fe and saying, hey, there's tourists in Santa Fe, you'll make more money panhandling up there. Have you heard that one?
I have heard about recreational panhandling, yeah, where people come up to Santa Fe to do it. And you know, who knows, that probably happens. I mean, it would make some degree of sense. I think that I think it's really a sign of the times that people are in economic stress, and the more we can help to stabilize those folks, you know, there will be a benefit to everybody. You know, our community as a whole isn't healthy when we have people who don't have a place to live.
Well, I always joke with people too. I say, you know, early morning, if you're heading down to Albuquerque, you see this train of lights coming up to you, cars rather. I say, these are all people from Santa Fe who now they sleep in Rio Rancho, that, you know, like a bedroom community of Albuquerque. They're from Santa Fe and they work at the state capitol, but they're having to commute into work every day because they can't afford to live in Santa Fe.
Yeah, it's very, very true.
That's been going on for a good 20 years at least.
Yep.
That's been happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that there are lots of costs to that kind of dynamic. We know that there are environmental costs. If people are driving cars, they're creating pollution. That just a road in and of itself is sort of damaging to the environment. We know that there are social costs. It's less time they're spending with their families, volunteering in their communities, resting, taking care of themselves, you know, cooking dinner, whatever. And then it really takes away from the fabric of the community when the people who are engaged in public decision-making processes tend to be the people who can make that work for their schedules. And if you're busy commuting, or you don't have time or energy for that kind of thing. So we know that a really big piece of that is the affordable housing piece. I will say this, we've done at the city level, we've done a couple of surveys for city employees who don't live here, and like, oh, would you live here if you could afford a home? And tons of them say yes, but a lot of them say no. And one of the reasons too is either they're from another community and they're invested in that community, but they have more housing choices. in other communities.
Well, yeah, their money, their dollars go further. I mean, for sure. I mean, you in Rio Rancho, you can get a brand new house for 250 tops, maybe 225,000. You know, and if you're a younger family starting out with small children, you want a backyard and a front yard. Well, that makes perfect sense because I think, if I'm not mistaken, isn't the median cost inching up, if it's not already at 600,000? The median cost of a home in Santa Fe right now? You would know the numbers better than I. I just read the papers, but what is the median cost of a home right now in Santa Fe?
So it's different within city limits. The county numbers are higher because of kind of those big sort of estates up in the hills. But yeah, it's between the last numbers I saw, the city within the city had cracked 500,000 for median. And we should explain, because not everybody works with this kind of statistic, but median means it's not an average. It means that there are that many houses priced above that point and that many houses priced below that point. So it's the middle price, just when you count the different houses at different price points. So you know, that's saying a lot.
But in reality, because I interview realtors all the time, anything under 500,000, they're almost non-existent. I mean, it's harder to find houses, you know, in a $300,000 range because they just don't exist because they just aren't that you can't find them.
Yeah, no, that's true. And that's where I think our inclusionary zoning program has been really successful, which is that the price points that the market rate developers required to sell a home at are within the reach of those first-time home buyers. But specifically our nonprofits, HomeWise and the Housing Trust and Habitat for Humanity, they've done amazing work to help people who can't compete in the marketplace with their incomes, but they've done amazing work to get those people, give them home ownership opportunities. So, you know, I think the cities, I'm always trying to recognize how great our partners are, because, you know, we certainly couldn't do it without them.
No, I've heard a lot of good things. I actually was a volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. I've actually helped build some of those houses way on up on Jaguar and stuff. So that's good. And HomeWise, I hear nothing but, you know, great things. And I'm still hopefully in the next week or so, I'm going to have some HomeWise people on this show to talk about what the work they're doing here. And I understand they do work all over the state. But, you know, and we had mentioned this before we had the interview, that the Santa Fe Realtors Board, they had a big study that just came out. And I think I looked at that study, and one of the things I caught was, although there are finally more apartments being built in Santa Fe, even with these new units going up, we're still about, I think it was maybe it's 2. I think I read 7,000 units short, or we still don't have enough, even with this new construction going on. Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. I mean, one of the statistics that we were able to nail down was looking at, for very low income renters, so somebody a household earning about 25,000, what was the deficit of units in the market that were priced at rents affordable without considering subsidized units, but you know, how many units were priced at rents affordable to that income? And we know that I mean, this is way low, but the numbers we could pull up for sure, it was 2,600, you know, so it's probably way more than that. And then when you start to get into the higher income ranges, there's shortages for almost every income range. And at the very high end, there are shortages. And while the city, you know, we're not going to do anything to help people with high incomes get housing, what it means is that they're competing with people with lower incomes for the limited inventory. And so then that drives up the rent. And then those people they're competing with the people in the next. And so you're sort of like bumping out of the housing market, all of the people with the lower incomes, as everyone's sort of grappling for the limited number of units. So adding units to our market, even though they are not set aside as affordably priced units, will bring down eventually the rents for market rate units, because it's supply and demand. And once the brand new nice units come on the market, the existing units either need to lower their rents, or they need to up their amenities to keep their tenants. And so there will be a softening in the market as soon as we get more inventory, which is good news.
Well, I had heard also that because so many people, because Santa Fe is such an international tourist destination, that many people that have little apartments or casitas, they've chosen to go the Airbnb route because they can make more money than having traditional tenants. Is there a way that the city could maybe work with some of these people and say, hey, I know this is attractive, but is there any type of subsidies or something that could happen for these people that have rentals so that they would have long-term rental? Because I think when you hear about it, the money sounds great, but there's a lot of headaches to having these people in and out all the time. I mean, is there anything the city can do to address that where they could, they could be fair to the people that have a property, but in a way they're helping the community?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And we've talked about some different ideas. One idea was to, and other communities have done this, where I think it was in Portland, the city of Portland told homeowners who had enough room in their backyard for a casita, or an accessory dwelling unit, as they call it in other places, that the city would build the unit. And if the owner of the house allowed the unit to be occupied by somebody who needed an affordable rental property for a certain amount of years, then the unit became theirs free and clear. So I don't think we're going to go to that kind of extreme yet. We just don't have the capacity, but we have been talking about that. How do you incentivize landlords to make it a more appealing to do long-term rentals? And for some landlords, there's we know we also, well, here's the other point. We have a lot of low-income landlords in our city. We have a lot of like mom and pop landlords, and their retirement income depends on the couple of units that they converted an old garage or an old shed or something in their backyard, or they bought, a long time ago, a house, whatever the story is. And they're excellent landlords for some of the subsidy programs, because they don't want to have to deal with finding tenants and kind of grappling with all of those hassles. And if they're working with a subsidy provider, the tenants are handed to them. But the problem is that sometimes their units are in need of some rehab. So we've also talked about that, like in turn for helping landlords with home repair, could we sort of make an arrangement with them that they would rent to a lower income renter. So there are good ideas out there, and we are really committed to bringing some of those ideas to fruition. It's been, the last few months have not been very productive with bringing new programs on.
What about tax incentives? Could, for these like landlords, they pay less property tax or something. There's got to be a reason for them to want to do this.
Yeah. So on the city level, we don't really control property taxes. That's the county. But we have talked about water. We do control water. We control the water company. And could we create a reduced water charge? And that, we may have some traction there.
Okay. And then I know before we even had this interview, you said that, there's not, your department right now can't be like, if somebody's watching this interview in another part of the country, you're not a resource in the sense that you can, you can't do a lot of things for them now, but are there on your website, do you have like these different places where they could do their own detective work and maybe try to navigate the system? What would you recommend?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have resources listed on our website. It's not, this might be a little outdated. It's pretty complete. We also, our contact is on the website. So we have a little brochure we can send to people. The Santa Fe Housing Action Coalition has been creating a resource directory. The New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority has a resource directory that lists all of the different providers in every county. So there are definitely ways where people can figure out how to get on the waiting list, or what the requirements are to get either a subsidized unit or a rental assistance to use in the community.
And in terms of a waiting list, how many years out is it right now for people that are already here?
Well, that's a very daunting situation. So the city, I'll just say this very clearly, does not manage units or provide assistance directly to anyone. We work with this nonprofit network. The Housing Authority, the Civic Housing Authority, and we also have a housing authority within the county government. So that's sort of the typical HUD Housing Authority model, where you either get a voucher you can use at a unit of your choice, or you live at one of the properties. Their lists are so long that they don't even open, the civic housing doesn't even open its list. You have to win a lottery just to get on the list.
Wow.
And so they're looking at years. It's so sad. But then we have this weird problem where somebody finally gets their voucher, they've been on the list forever, and they can't find a unit. They either can't find a landlord who's willing to take it, or they can't find a unit that will pass the housing quality inspection standards, because in Santa Fe we have a lot of old housing. Or there just isn't the inventory. So we're kind of like, wow, that's really challenging, and that's tragic. If you've been waiting for years and you finally get it, and then you can't actually just find a unit where you can use it. So we're working, that's another piece of that, trying to make landlords partners too, and sort of help people understand that there are benefits to taking a voucher.
And is that voucher system, is that what they call Section 8 housing, or what is Section 8 housing?
Yeah, that's what that's the old name. It's very governmental sounding. And so several years ago, HUD changed it to the housing choice voucher. And the idea is you get to choose the unit where you want to live, and then the voucher, you pay what you can for your rent based on your income. And then the voucher makes up the difference between what you can pay and what the market rent for that unit would be. But when there's nothing nothing in the inventory that's available to anyone, it's really hard to use it. It's hard to have a choice.
Right. Okay. And so you were saying that this, we had already discussed this before we did the interview about, it's kind of like, I shouldn't use the word, it's kind of depressing right now, what's going on with COVID and everything else. But you said, but there is some kind of an upside. What are like some of the positive things about that's going on with real estate and housing in Santa Fe? I think you were saying maybe for investors or people that might want to create things here, because we're basically at the end of the interview, but what are some of the positive things if somebody's watching this from, say, California or something, that might entice them to think of investing in Santa Fe or Santa Fe County or somewhere in northern New Mexico?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's something about, even in a pandemic, the quality of life here is still excellent and wonderful. And the construction industry is fairly low contact. So COVID hasn't really slowed it down. So there's still lots of kind of activity going on in that part of the world. I think we have, well, it's been very interesting. I think we've also just cracked open new opportunities in the governmental sector to provide services that we never thought were possible. If you had asked me even a year ago, oh, would the city of Santa Fe ever operate a homeless shelter? I would say, no, of course not. We can't do that. And in March, we started doing that, and we've made it work, and we've created a whole model for this, and actually facilitated the purchase of a hotel to convert it to long-term affordable units for people, and even people transitioning out of homelessness. I never would have dreamed that was a possibility a year ago. So that's exciting. I think that's the bright side to all of this craziness.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to be interviewed today. And then again, I will have along with this interview, I'll have your contact details, so that if people go to the City of Santa Fe's website, some of these resources you mentioned, I mean, that will help them a lot if they're looking in this area, perhaps. And again, I always tell people the reason I started SantaFe101.com is so that people will learn about the 33 counties in New Mexico, because although Santa Fe, it's my hometown, it's incredibly beautiful, the entire state is beautiful, and it is more affordable in different parts of the state. So we want people to be part of the land of enchantment, and but we don't want to discourage them from the high cost of living here in Santa Fe.
Yes, that's true.
Well, listen, thanks again.
Well, thank you.